Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever it is, wherever you are, welcome to the Good Values podcast. In this episode, I talk to a lovely person who I've never met before, but I was given the contact from a previous guest, Mike Williams. Now, if you haven't seen that episode, then I will leave a link right here. So check that one out. Now, this person is a fantastic professional illustrator, and I was very glad to meet them. And without any further ado, this is my conversation with Lisa Williams. Would you mind introducing yourself for the audience, please?
Yes, certainly. My name's Lisa Williams. I've been illustrating children's books and educational material for 30 years now. Can't believe where that's gone. Started off obviously on paper and posting off my artwork, but these days obviously everything's digital. So it's all I draw on the iPad.
Really? So you don't do any work on paper anymore, or has it gone completely digital?
Yeah, no. 100% digital, yes.
When did you make that transition?
Probably about 3 years ago, 100%. I mean, it's been a gradual process, but I just found using the iPad Pro, so it's a nice size screen. It's just a very natural drawing process. Using the iPencil, it's not going to show it to you then, but you know what they look like. Very simple, sort of little slim white pencil. Even the feel of the pencil itself feels very natural. So no, I love it. I've adapted to it really easily, and I'm probably quite traditional in that I love charcoal. I love the feel of paper, the smell of materials, but this has felt the closest to the real thing. And
really?
It's just, it's such an efficient way of working because it's there and you can just email it straight off to the client straight away.
Oh, so lovely.
Yeah.
Do you have a specific kind of screen cover? The reason I ask is that I've tried this on Procreate, and I've been told that the reason it doesn't feel quite as nice to me as it does to others is that they have a specific surface material where it feels more natural, like paper or something.
No, just the screen. Yeah.
And
funny enough, I too use Procreate.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, it's so like Photoshop. So it was a very natural, again, way to work. And of course, Photoshop's £40-50 a month to subscribe. Yeah. And Procreate is, I think, about £9 now to download. Yeah. So it just makes absolute sense for me, certainly. So, and the layering effects and just the fluid process is fantastic. And it goes on and on. There's just so many little techniques you can discover, as well as, accidental mark making, which is really nice, really nice. It hasn't got that clinical feeling that you might expect from working digitally.
That's nice.
Yeah. There's a softness too.
Sorry, I was just going to mention as well, there's a nice feature on Procreate, which I hadn't realized until a month or so after using it, that you can watch every stage of your drawing back. Have you ever done that, where you watch all the layers build up?
I have. I realised that that's available, but I haven't actually got around to doing it myself yet.
No.
Yeah, but it was to see, rubbings out and jumping back and forth and moving characters around, and yes.
Yeah, it's very entertaining.
Yeah, it's quite a fluid process, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh,
lovely.
I think the most dynamic stage, obviously, is the initial sketches. Coming up, planning the page. You've got certain criteria. You've been asked to include a certain number of characters. What have I done this morning? This morning I've done a picture of a dog and his chickens, their friends, and they've just escaped from the farmer and leapt over the fence, and they're hiding behind the hedge, all very relieved. And the dog is laying out on the floor like this, dreaming of his bowl of water. And the chickens are all hugging each other because they're so relieved that they've got away from the farm. Yeah, it's great. And, again, they're just moving these characters around, trying to make it work. trying it from different angles. It's great. It's so quick and easy. I say easy, it's not easy. I wish it was, but it's, as I say, it's just a really fluid process. Yeah.
Do you still have the thumbnail stage, or do you skip that stage of the process?
No. I start with very, very rough sketches in a very similar way. I don't know, have you ever used a light box?
I have briefly, yeah.
Yes. And Quentin Blake, the illustrator, Quentin, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the way he works.
Yeah.
But even now, he still works traditionally. So he'll do a very rough, energetic sketch. I mean, his work is so energetic anyway. And then place it on a light box, and then put the watercolor paper, sort of quite smooth watercolor pressed paper on top, and then he'll use his dip pen, normally ink, and then just very loosely go over the lines that you can see from the underneath sketch. I would say the way I work in Procreate is very, very similar. I'll bring the page from the book up on screen on my page in Procreate, and you can see the gap, obviously, where the illustration is meant to go, and the text is all there. I'll then do a thumbnail sketch in that gap, very scruffy, in the same way that Quentin Blake, my hero, draws. I'll then create another layer, get the airbrush tool on semi-transparent, just do a very light brush with the airbrush. So then it's a bit like the light box. You can just faintly see the sketch from underneath. Create another layer, and then I do my drawing. And again, I try not to make it too tight and specific, because the drawing loses its energy.
Absolutely.
So in that, I mean, my work doesn't have the same energy that Quentin Blake does, but the theory behind it is the same.
Oh, lovely.
And then really from there you can then create, add your color layers beneath.
Beautiful.
But the drawing is the essential part, I think, creating that initial good sort of draftsmanship, good energy, and that fundamental part of illustration.
Perhaps a strange question, I'm not sure, but do you use black for your lines, or do you use like a brownish sort of color to soften the tones of everything? Or
yes, often the characters in the foreground, the main characters, will be outlined in black, and maybe more distant parts of the illustration will be sort of toned down colors depending on the theme of the coloring page.
Oh, lovely. I see, to give it a sense of depth immediately with the tones. Lovely. Oh, that's nice. Okay, it's just that I've noticed on... Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk over you, I'm sorry. I've noticed on animation how they very rarely use black, because they use a kind of a brown or a kind of darkened flesh tone to make everything softer, I suppose, and blend with the colour of the character more. But I was just curious in case that's a practice that you use. But sorry, what were you going to say before I interrupted?
Oh, don't you worry. Can't remember.
Oh, no. Terrible. Well, I was going to mention as well, I don't know if you've heard of Brian Bolland. He's a British illustrator for 2000 AD, or used to be. I don't think he is currently. But he said something interesting about preferring a tablet and stylus that was separate to the screen, so that he wasn't drawing on the screen. And he said the reason was he found it to be much more advantageous to not have his hand in the way when he was drawing, which I thought was a really interesting observation that I'd never thought of, because I always use physical materials and pencils and things. So I never really considered the fact that sometimes your hand can be in the way when you're drawing something and you can't see the path that you're trying to score. And it just really made me smile to think of how much he thinks of that on a technical level. But again, I suppose that's a preference that he's found, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's interesting, because I'm quite the opposite. I did try that way of working. But I prefer seeing my hand making the mark.
Yeah.
To get that takes me closer to the original, authentic way of drawing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, to be honest, I get a little disorientated if I can't see where I'm placing the nib, sometimes I can lose where I am and have to Control Z all the time, or can Command Z or something. Yeah. Anyway, to my questions, I have set questions that I usually ask, so forgive me for being very formatted, but how is it that you got started in professionally making art? What was your path through?
Well, I told my parents when I was 6 years old that I was going to be an artist and illustrator. And I didn't need to go to school. I didn't need to do maths or physics or science or anything like that, because I knew what I wanted to do. So what was the point? Why'd I have to do exams? And no, I'd made up my mind, and that was it. So I did actually pick up the odd commission while I was still in school.
Wow.
Just, bits and bobs. But yeah, I was always very sort of clear in my decision. So I just followed the path. I did a year's art foundation, did my A-levels, year's art foundation in Bangor, where again you try lots of different areas and specialities. But yeah, I still followed my path and went then to, well, there were different choices, but I chose to go to De Montfort in Leicester, the biggest art school in Europe. Every floor seemed to have something different going on. It was really fascinating when we visited. And gosh, everything from footwear design, surface decoration, the fine art department was amazing, sort of animation, ceramics, jewellery, lots of different specialisms within 3D design. And I just found it really inspiring. And the graphic design course covered a certain amount of animation, illustration, and graphics. So initially, again, you go in, and the first year is, or it was then anyway, quite, you try different aspects, and as the 3 years progress, you specialise. And I specialised obviously in illustration.
Yes, fantastic. So how did you choose illustration over other disciplines? Was it just, I don't know, did it feel more well suited to you, or was there something where you had tried other disciplines, or what happened there?
I always like my images to think of words to go with the illustration. So even, gosh, I hate to say it, but I was literally 18 months old, and I'd draw something and I'd say to my mum, worm, and she'd have to label it worm. So worm and images always went together. They just went hand in hand. And if it was Mummy and Daddy in a field, my mum would have to write Mummy and Daddy in a field. Or if it was a worm. Yeah, apparently worms were one of my things to draw, but yes.
That's lovely.
Yeah, so words and images always, that was a very strong connection for me. Yeah.
Does your work have a specific colour palette? Is there colours that you like to include, or certain, do you go more pastel, or do you go heavily saturated, or do you make sure it's more primary colours? Is there anything where you have a preference?
I actually, no, probably not. But interior design, and that's a completely different aspect of lots of in my home. But in illustration, I tend to adapt my style to suit. I work closely with a lot of authors, and they will have an idea, or they'll have seen some images that they really like, and I'll draw in my style, but I might just twist the colour theme or just something in the style that they like to fit the client, basically. So I do adapt and change, which can confuse some people. And say, gosh, is that your work as well? I said, yes, it is mine.
Wow.
Yeah, so it does. Yeah, my style actually changes, and I'll just evolve it slightly differently for each client. So in a sense, I suppose some people say you're almost like a graphic designer illustrating, rather than having the fine art side where you have a much more specific, strong, recognizable style. But that's
fantastic.
The way I've got. Yes.
Yeah, that's lovely. So yeah, that's really interesting. Is it the same with the mark making as well? Do you change the kind of style of the draftsmanship?
Yes.
That's interesting.
I mean, the basic sketch, the underlying sketch is always me, but maybe the final sort of top drawing, when we go back to thinking about the layers and procreate, then At that stage, I'll write, okay, I'll hone it just slightly more, leaning towards a particular style that the author likes.
Oh, wow. So is there, aside from Quentin Blake, is there anyone who is a specific inspiration to you? Or, I mean, it doesn't have to be artist, is there? Sometimes I ask for people for inspiration, as though it could be poetry or music or wherever, or nature, or, what is a good source of inspiration for you outside of I mean, I do highly rate Quentin Blake myself. I do absolutely admire his work.
Yes, I do love the energy of his work and the zany quality, and the fact that his drawings, they appeal to young and old. He might do an illustration and you wouldn't say, well, that would you pitch that at a 7 to 8 year old. It's actually quite acceptable for an adult to sort of see illustrations like that in that style in a book for them. It crosses all the ages and genres, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
he is my absolute favourite.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. I can see why. But is there another source? I mean, is there things where you go on a walk and you get inspiration from that, or do you where do you find your inspiration otherwise?
Constantly. I mean, I think if you're visual, you see things every day, and it can be completely random. It could be an advert in a newspaper or a magazine, or just something that pops up, on your desktop, or walk. But just the light, maybe when I go to take my dog for a walk along the beach, the light, there's just something about it, or the way a child leaps and plays in the sand. You just think, oh yes, and that stays here. If you're visual, it's there, isn't it? And I think, yes, you can then just recapture that energy.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah. I mean, I'm what was I thinking then? Sorry, I've just gone completely blank because I was just thinking about that, how that's the thing for me a lot of the time is shadows on people's clothing. For some reason, it's kind of where the creases occur or where the shadows collect. I usually look and think, oh, that's so beautiful how it just naturally folds and gathers in that area. It's lovely. I think
it's funny you should say that, because the one time I did an oil painting, I just did it with a piece of fabric, a piece of velvet that was all just crunched up together, just real. Wow. And that was all about the shadows and the shapes. And
beautiful. I mean, you can almost leave out everything else if you have a pleasing midtone or something in to sit it on. Beautiful. Yeah, I love that.
Absolutely. Yes.
Oh, fantastic. So if I ask a bit more of a broad question, really, which is, what do you value about art?
I think the fact that it's so accessible. It doesn't have to be elitist. Certain illustration, it's accessible. All generations can have an opinion. Children will just come straight back at you and have something to say. They'll have an opinion. They'll like it. They hate it. They're black and white in their opinions. It is. It's a very acceptable art form. Certainly, illustration.
What would you say is the difference between illustration and fine art?
Yeah, I remember asking my tutor, Peter Prendergast, that very same question. And he said, oh, Lisa, you've obviously been thinking about this. I never actually answered the question.
No. I've had lots of answers. They're always interesting, but I never feel as though they are fully true end to end. They always have exceptions on either side.
Yeah, I mean, I would say illustration, there's a brief, there are restrictions, and you are putting, you're trying to create something to fit a brief. Whereas fine art, I would say fine art comes from here and illustration comes from here. That's the extreme, but there is a balance in between the two, do you know? I'd say the emphasis with fine art is it's much more instinctive. There's no brief specifically, whereas illustration is much more, you're following that brief and you're following instructions. And hopefully some of the heart comes through as well, but it's just that slightly different emphasis.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, I suppose because I'm currently working with someone in a collaboration, and we're applying for council funding, arts council funding. When you were describing the brief and this, I do feel as though I'm going through that process, not to undermine what you've just said, because I do think it's on the whole true, but it does currently feel more cerebral than it does emotional as a process where, I mean, because at the same time, I feel as though I'm possibly more of an illustrator than a fine artist, but I don't really know how to parse out that, the differences between the two. So it's just something which I sometimes wrestle with and I'm curious about. And another broad question, and I apologize for how broad it is, but I've been interested in how people answer this, and it's, how would you define art?
Oh God, how do you answer that one? That's a very difficult, as you say, very broad question, very, very broad question.
Yeah. I don't have an answer, just so that you know.
No.
There's no right or wrong as far as I'm concerned.
Gosh, I think that's a whole separate interview in itself, to be honest.
Okay, we'll skip that one then, because that's quite it's quite an all-encompassing question. So yeah, I would say otherwise, there's a question which I like to ask everyone who I speak to on here, and it's something which my art mentor used to ask me every day that I would see her, and I would see her almost every day for a year while she was mentoring me, and it was always a relevant question, and that is, what's the most beautiful thing you've seen today?
Oh, I think it'd be the sunrise.
You saw the sunrise, did you?
It wasn't, the absolute sunrise, but it was just the awakening of the day, and just as the sun really starts to brighten up, and that very early start, and the birds, you can just hear the birds so clearly, and I just love that really early time in the morning. It's beautiful.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, that's lovely.
I think the rest of the world is still asleep, and it feels as if you're just in this secret world somehow. There's something quite special.
Yeah, I get that at night time, I must admit. I was up until 4 a.m. painting last night, so I was. It did feel like my world at that time, where no one else is awake. So yeah, I get that feeling at that time of day. But I can't. I can do early mornings, I should say. It's not I'm not someone who can't do mornings, but last night was especially. That's why I'm a bit less prepared today. So you have to forgive me. I was a bit more.
You just get into the flow, don't you? And you don't want to stop. And if you're in that flow, you don't want to. And if that momentum's still there, you want to kind of harness it and just go with it, because it can be so difficult to find that zone again, can't it? Sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, I must admit, last night was a last-minute request where I've been doing Inktober this year, and I had an injury to my right hand, so I've been doing it left-handed so far. To try and become ambidextrous is the goal by the end of the month, but so far it's not been the case. It's still quite jagged and hard to get some nice, hatching and things. But it's a nice thing to practice and see what happens. And then I was requested to do a card for a family member, with a bouquet of flowers. So that was after my Inktober installment last night. So yeah, that's why it was such a late night, as it just wasn't a priority, and sadly it just pushed me into a late hour. But anyway, now another question that my art mentor used to ask me every day as well, another question which I loved, because I'd always be drawing or painting when I'd be with her, and then she'd ask me this question. But I ask it because you're not drawing and painting at the moment. I'm not asking it about a piece of artwork you're working on now, but more generally your artwork. And that is, what do you like and what don't you like about your own artwork?
Good question. I often don't like my own artwork. That's a very good question. But other people like it, so that reaffirms that you're doing the right thing. And I think it's only natural that you always question, and you're your own harshest judge. But that's what forces us to improve and to evolve and change. I think it's quite a healthy thing. There's striking that balance, isn't there?
Yeah.
Between self-destruct and the motivation. So hopefully there's enough of each to make progress.
So you like the connection with the audience, but what is it that you don't that you look at and you think, because for an example, for my own work, I often know that my composition isn't as well informed as it could be, and I need to work on finishing a piece as opposed to enjoying the start and getting it to that mid stage where I think it's passable, and I'm terrible for giving up at that point. So that's the things which I don't like currently generally about my artwork, is that I'm not pushing through to that finish which is more well refined. Are there any parts which you could say you're aware of your own artwork where you think this is what I'm not as keen on, or this is something I'm critical about, or anything like that?
It's important not to overwork something. I mean, certainly with the way I work, if you want to keep some energy and life in your illustrations, if you overwork it, you kill it. You kill it dead. So it's keeping that refinement, but not overworking it. It's a very fine balance again. I mean, I love painting as well, so that's a different process altogether. So with that, I mean, you can go on and on and on, can't you? Yeah. Constantly. Sort of, I mean, I like doing mixed media pieces. I'll sew bits of sort of old nuts and bolts and sort of little nails and all sorts with copper wire into paintings, and
really,
yes, and quite different things. And you can just go on and on, but I suppose that's diametrically opposite to the way I work with my illustration, where you've got to keep the lines really minimal and not overwork them, because it kills that energy.
Yeah.
It's just striking.
Quite jealous of people who can introduce mixed media. I've really always struggled with that for some reason. If I start with acrylic, I end with acrylic, and if I start with black pens, I won't introduce another color pen. I don't know what that is, but I have this strange rule of starting and finishing with specific materials. And when I try mixed media, it's for the sake of mixed media as opposed to a natural process. So I'm always quite envious of the people who can naturally be quite explorative, I suppose, and adventurous with their creative process. Yeah, it's always impressive. Yeah.
Well, for me, I think it's a reaction, in a sense, to working to a very specific brief, to then just be able to do something completely radically different and throw all sorts at it. You've got your restrictions, and then it's just quite a natural reaction, isn't it, to then want to work without restrictions. So in actual fact, the work I do it'll be completely abstract mixed media. There are no specific images. It's about texture, it's about the colour theme, and yeah, very, very different. Yes.
Yeah, I suppose you're able to correct from layers. I don't know how far you can go back on Procreate, how many times you can say undo this and undo this until there's a limit of your first marks, because I suppose there's so many decisions that you make. There must be save points throughout. I'm not as familiar as I should be with Procreate. I've used it, I don't know, several dozen times, but it's not nearly enough to familiarize myself fully with the program. But I can imagine, much like Photoshop, there's a cap on how far back you can undo things. So yeah, that must be a point of I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure whether that's necessarily something you need, but I think that's something where it's a positive for digital artwork. But there was always a fear from certain artists that I spoke to that if you become accustomed to having that ability to step back and correct something, that you may not be able to transfer those skills to tangible materials.
That's very true. It's very. What I'll do when I'm working in Procreate, if I've reached a point where I think, do I actually want to radically change this, or do I want to keep it like this? I'll duplicate the document. So I've got the sketch as it is, and then I'll duplicate it, do all my radical work, rubbings out, alterations, and then compare the two. So that way Yes, it's just a lazy way of doing it, I guess. I don't know, but whatever works. I think we all
It is.
evolve our own processes, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are you, sorry, just to clarify, do you work freelance or are you working for, oh, you work freelance, do you?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Mm.
That's really good. And you teach as well, did you say? Yeah.
Um, no, I trained as a teacher.
Mm.
And I've done, over the years, I've done a few sort of classes in the community through Llandershlo, or the odd thing in, as workshops and schools and things like that.
Mm.
But no, I've never held a full-time teaching post.
Oh, I suppose that's possibly the best thing if you're loving the freelance life, I suppose, and you have a good
Yeah.
momentum going, then
Yeah.
other things can slow that down, I suppose, or interrupt it. So no, good for you. That's fantastic. Yeah, I really appreciate that. That was really good. And is there anywhere that you'd like my audience to find you? Is there any social media accounts you'd like to direct people to?
Well, Facebook, Lisa Williams Illustration. It's just my Facebook page, and I don't even have a website. I mean, it's awful, isn't it? All these years in business, but I seem to get a lot of referrals, and I find Facebook is a really lovely, fluid way of just uploading things you're working on, so people can have a constant feed of just seeing where you're at. And whereas a website is a lot more cumbersome to
Mm.
edit. Yeah, so yeah, just my Lisa Williams Illustration Facebook page.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah,
And
lots
is
of
there?
samples.
Do you not have an Instagram as well?
I do. Yes, I'm getting more into Instagram these
Yeah.
days.
Is it worth linking that, or would you just need the Facebook link? What would you like?
I can pop it on there. Yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Because just in case, because this will be uploaded and then on the internet forever, as far as we know, then yeah, possibly your Instagram may be something which be worth linking people to. And if you have a website in the future, we can always update the details and put that on. But yeah, it's fantastic talking to you. Thank you so much for being a guest, and hopefully I'll have you on again if you'd be willing to pop on again, perhaps next year or something when you have any upcoming. Is there any upcoming project that you'd like to talk about? Is there anything that you've got coming up which is worth, or is it all personal commissions?
It's all the majority of my work. I work directly with authors, many of them self-publishing. So, gosh, I've got such a variety of projects. I couldn't say one over the other.
Okay. All
no,
right.
yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Well, in that case, yeah, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast, and yeah, I'll hopefully be in touch and speak to you again before too long.
Oh, lovely. Oh, thanks for having me on.
Oh,
Take
thank
care.
you. Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so that is the episode done. Now, I thought that was a fantastic conversation. She was so nice to talk to, really kind and generous and very talented. I thought the work was beautiful, and I really liked the way that she would share her preferences and her also part of her process, really. I thought it was a really good conversation. I really enjoy people like that because I just think that they're so warm and friendly, and I really value people who can just share parts of themselves without exposing too much of their private life, but just giving you something where you feel as though you've learned from them and you've just had a really nice chat with someone who will help you along the way if you're ever struggling, or if you ever need that motivation or someone to think of where you think, who is a professional who I really would like to be the embodiment of in this moment where I'm, either missing something which I need, or I would just like to be more positive and professional. And that's what I got from her. I thought she was absolutely lovely. Please check out all of her social media links that I will leave in the description below. And check out any previous episodes. If you haven't seen all the episodes of Good Values, then there are lots of interesting guests and conversations that I've had. The answers to the questions are always really interesting. Even if it's the same question, the answers vary and it shows the different personalities and preferences. And I love that. That's why there are certain questions that will always reappear in each episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, then please leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel, ring that notification bell, share this with any friends or family who you think might enjoy it. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in the next episode.